Welcome to the Kickstart My Franchise podcast. I'm your host, Tim Michaels. Today's guest is a multi-unit Crumbl Cookies franchisee and also the founder of Initiator Capital, which provides private debt to companies looking for growth capital. I'm excited to have Shideler Bennett joining us today. How you doing, Shideler?
Tim, thanks for having me. Super happy to be on the podcast. It's gracious of you to let me join.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you. Crumbl is in the news right now with earnings coming out for last year. So I think first things first, what is Crumbl Cookies, just in case somebody has been living in a cave for the past year?
Yeah, so Crumbl Cookies is a gourmet dessert franchise, typically in 1,000 to 1,500 square feet, and produce these cookies on site that rotate the flavors every week. So we're giving a huge variety. I think it also has been more of a social media sensation than really many franchises I've ever heard of. And so it's, I think, got upwards of like 10 million plus across different platforms as far as subscribers, followers, whatever else. So a very unique product offering that way as well.
Lots of different flavors out there. I know my wife and kids, like every time that, one of them gets a hit at a baseball game or something, it's like they're going to get a Crumbl cookie. What's your favorite of all time?
So I really like anything to do with like the waffles or kind of like breakfast because the like butter and syrup cookie is just super good. And then obviously you can't go wrong with anything Oreo. Those are also really solid sellers.
In terms of like how the flavors are actually chosen, like are you as a franchisee brought into that process at all, or like do you know like how that actually is chosen on a weekly basis?
You know what? It was something that Crumbl was growing so fast in the beginning that they were making it up as they went. They, for better or for worse, were innovating and getting things out there and testing it. And we had some cookies that really just didn't do well. The brand has matured a lot now. And so there is some data and analytics behind it. And we do have a menu council of franchisees that help give their feedback on that. But the menu is determined typically a year in advance by Crumbl Corporate.
Wow.
And as franchisees, we can see, a couple weeks out, but we don't see the entire year's menu. And so that provides its own logistic challenges, as I'm sure you can imagine.
That is incredible. I was not expecting you to say that is planned a year in advance. That's crazy. That blows my mind, honestly. Um, as far as like the backstory of you actually getting involved with Crumbl, like can you talk to us about like how did you hear about Crumbl? How did you get interested?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you the condensed version because there's a lot of details that probably the audience wouldn't care too much about. But I got my degree in personal finance and thought I was going to be a wealth advisor and started going down that path, decided that I wanted to do insurance, property and casualty insurance, and wanted to be more of a business owner and acquire agencies essentially. So I bought in with a partner of mine to an independent agency here in Utah, and that owner had some of the first Crumbl locations that were here locally. My partner actually helped them move one of the mixers in and came back and was like, man, that thing was so heavy. Like, I can't believe that they're baking these on site, mixing and doing everything there. And then this partner, would just talk to us about Crumbl, and we're like, man, if it's going that well, why wouldn't you just do a ton of them? Why? Like the business side of our minds just couldn't let it go, and ultimately we decided that we were going to go after it as well. So we went out, and me and this partner raised private capital, and I've tried raising money for multiple offerings. And this was the first time that an opportunity really caught on with people. They were like, yeah, I want to own some Crumbl cookie stores because it was new. It tasted so good. It was
Yeah.
going viral on social media. I mean, this was COVID time, right? So people were just talking about what was on social media. Crumbl was crushing it. It was something new that people had to look forward to every week, and it really just started rolling. So got that money raised, got approved by Crumbl, and ultimately went from 0 franchises to 9, developing them with essentially no franchising experience. And made all the mistakes possible, but went from 0 to 9 in about 2 years. Um,
Wow.
while learning all about funding and really what it is to be a franchisee and how challenging it can be to grow that quickly, how to get the funding put up to even make it happen that fast, let alone put in the work to open the locations, talk with, brokers to find leases and talk with GCs to coordinate build outs. It was quite the undertaking.
Wow. So it's just you and one other partner that opened these 9 locations, or do you have a
We
bunch of
had
different
capital partners
okay, capital partners?
as well, and then we did have operating partners that were involved in different groups in that. Which again, I thought, oh yeah, we'll have operating partners, and that way I won't have to even worry about any of the day to day. And that is so far from the truth of what it really takes to run a successful franchise. You really can only keep someone accountable if you understand the business to that level. And
Absolutely.
yeah, that was a great, great learning experience, right?
So you guys are opening, it sounds like one every like 3 months or so at the beginning of this. Like what were the biggest challenges that you were running into? Like was it real estate? Was it just hiring people?
In Crumbl, we've never had challenges hiring people. Again, because the brand is cool.
Social media?
It's the demographic of first time employees love the brand. It is a fun environment. It's not like fast food where, it's just kind of this gross, smelly thing. It's like it all smells pretty good. It's sweet. It's fun. Like there's music playing. It's a bakery vibe. And so it does attract people easily that way. The challenges that I had was one, doing business in California and dealing with the permitting and all of the stuff that way. I don't know how much business I'll do in California in the future because of those challenges.
Yeah.
But really the coordinating of leases, right? Because you're trying to move quickly, but you also don't want to pick a bad location. And you have that pressure from the franchisor to get into spaces, but that's a big commitment. You're talking 5 to 10 years. And if you pick the wrong spot, that can be a big determining factor. And so we actually did have contractors steal our money, steal our materials. I lived in San Diego for a couple of months while doing build out. So I physically dug holes for the plumbing. I ran the wiring. I mean, when
That's
I
awesome.
say I learned this business from the very ground up, that's no exaggeration.
That is amazing. And so how many of the 9 are in California then? Are they all in California?
No, 4 of the 9 are in
4 of the
California,
9?
Tennessee,
Okay.
and Michigan.
Okay. And I know like California is having some law changes here around sort of minimum wage and stuff. I assume there's got to be some concerns around that.
Definitely. I mean, it was a big concern, especially every year the minimum wage goes up regardless. So right now we're at 16.50 an hour. And then fast food, which because we're a bakery, we're exempt from that, is $20 an hour. And I mean, you're seeing the headlines, but how how do a lot of these companies even survive? Well, the reality is service is going to be affected, and people are going to just close locations down because it doesn't make sense to work.
Yeah.
It's just like it's not worth doing business there. That's the hard part. So it's really going
Yeah.
to affect everyone.
No, I've heard that from a lot of business owners in California for sure. Um, as far as like the day-to-day challenges of like actually running a Crumbl, like were you in there like as a GM or whatever the role is of like operator at any of these locations? And like what is the biggest challenge?
So you've got a couple of different things, and so I was never the main, let's say, day-to-day operator. I definitely have worked my shifts. I've mixed dough, I've balled dough, I've done everything. Um, but it is balancing the demand with trying not to waste, right? So we are always trying to have every flavor available. But one thing that people wouldn't think about is, let's say that someone comes in and they order 12 packs or party boxes of certain types of cookies. And they say, just, I want these two, and let's just fill up this many. So all of a sudden, I thought I was prepared, but now they just
Mhm.
bought out kind of like a whole section of my cookies. And then the
Yeah.
challenge that creates is when someone comes in and says, hey, Shideler, I want a 4 pack or a 6 pack, but now I'm missing the one or two cookies that they wanted. They now don't want to buy a full thing. So they might just say, I'll just take chocolate chip. Can't go wrong with it.
Mhm.
Oh man, I was going to do a 6 pack and try all the cookies, but if you don't have them, you know, oh well. So it's a really interesting balance that way where you're having to, and same with ingredients, right? You might run out of some of these specialty Reese's chips, or like Oreo, whatever, M&Ms, whatever the specialty is. If you run out of one of those little things, you're just kind of stuck,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah. I hadn't even thought of that. That's interesting. So in terms of, Crumbl as a brand overall, obviously, meteoric growth, got, as you mentioned, tons and tons of social media attention. Probably one of the first franchises to really truly grow through social media as like the primary vehicle. Um, and then we had some declines last year, went from 1.84 million in average store sales down to 1.16, average net profit going from 298 down to 122,000. Can you just talk a little bit about the inside, what you saw as an owner?
yeah, it's interesting because people are like, "Oh yeah, it's the fad," and I'm like, "No, this got affected by COVID and all of the stimulus." So think about this. I don't think anyone will ever replicate what Crumbl has done in this type of business, because it had unprecedented historical things that happened. One, everyone gets shut down and is like using social media more than ever, right? And Crumbl just happened to really catch that and starts going really viral.
Hmm.
Two, people have more disposable income than they've had in like recent history, and they can't do entertainment, they can't do all these things. What are they going to spend it on? Food, right?
Yeah.
Dessert. So, okay, all of a sudden you've got that. And then the other piece is like, okay, well, if that's happening, the numbers are astronomical. People are paying these off in 6 to 8 months. So it's kind of like, why not open them, right? There's no reason not to. And
Right.
so these stores were opening, doing 200,000 to 400,000 per month in revenue. And it was just more a challenge of keeping cookies in stock than anything else.
Mhm.
You didn't have to worry about profit. You didn't have to worry about your lease costs. You didn't have to worry about anything. And everyone knows that's not sustainable, but it was shocking how long it kept happening. Everyone we'd talk to, it would just be better. And another state, it would just be better, and it would be better. Like all of a sudden you're like, man, you kind of wonder if it can go down, right? The say at the top. And we all knew that this is not a normal franchise thing, right? Franchises typically live in the range of, if you're making 15% net income, it's a good franchise. That's
Mhm.
what it is.
Mhm.
And these were doing 30% plus. And so it was no surprise. What was surprising was how drastically it dropped. And the big factors on that is money has dried up faster than it's ever dried up in history. Again, it's kind of like you're now affecting the fastest interest rate hikes in history. You're having everyone now with the GLP-1s, worried about their health and losing weight and all these different things, which those are the direct customers that we're targeting. right?
Yeah.
The that segment is affected, and we'll see how much that actually affects it. But then the other part of it is, yeah, I think some of the novelty has worn off, and once you make it to all 50 states, it's less of like, oh, I it's, it's now in every town, so it's not as, hard to get. So I think
Yeah.
some of that wears off. But people are coming at it saying, oh, it's dead, all these different things. And what they don't understand is Crumbl has built out all of their own technology. They have more of a following than any other brand, basically bar none, and are positioned in a way where they are the market leader. It's not even close. And what we get the opportunity to do now is diversify out of cookies. We still only sell, one thing, and we've started offering some of these limited time offers between pies and cakes and things, and they're already doing well. And so
Yeah.
I think that's the piece that people are missing is like, yeah, was it oversaturated? Sure. Yeah. I mean, but when you're doing the numbers that they were doing, it's kind of hard to, refute why they would have gone there, right? Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so there's going to be some consolidation. But anyone who says it's a fad like yogurt, I have a lot of reasons why it's not even close. Not to mention, if you've ever used the app, you'll understand that the gifting experience is second to none. I can send cookies to anyone in the country, watch it get to their home, and I mean, single-handedly, I think the best experience from a delivery perspective that I've seen on an app. I mean, I'm obviously biased, but it's smooth.
Can't say I've used the app. I'm sure my wife has many times, but can't say I have. I guess one question on the saturation comment. Um, like one thing that always concerns me about franchises that blow up is like how much protected territory there is, and if they're scrunching these in sort of too closely together so that one franchise location is sort of cannibalizing the other. Do you have any like perspective on that within Crumbl specifically, or even just more broadly within franchising?
Yeah, if you're a franchise or franchisor, guess what? You're probably not a commercial real estate professional, right? You probably don't understand that to the level that you could or should to really be as effective as you might need to pick all of the locations correctly. And obviously, that's why you hire brokers. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of mistakes, I think, I know on the corporate side, but it's easy to say that in hindsight, right? The territories on our FDDs are much smaller than what I think you'd ever put stores, in that same proximity. But the numbers were supporting what they were doing, right? Like the stores were still doing amazing being 5-10 miles away, right?
Yeah.
And now that things have slowed down, you're like, oh yeah, I can't believe that they would do that. But I mean, I'm not even as like saturation is definitely part of it, but I think the macro economy is much more of the issue than really anything else at this point.
Yeah, I mean, 5 to 10 miles actually doesn't sound that bad. I know for like game day men's health, for instance, I think it was a 3 mile protected radius. So they definitely get a lot smaller than 5 to 10 miles.
So ours
Uh,
was only at the end. It was originally 3, and then it was a mile and a half.
oh,
So
wow.
then that's 3 miles, so that your bubbles didn't touch.
Yeah,
But I didn't really hear of anyone even getting that close. But I think that they were wise in giving themselves some space.
some
Uh,
buffer.
yeah, and again, it's all on concentration of people.
So I imagine, the decline, like you said, it was expected to some extent to happen at some point, but maybe not to the extent that it did happen. And so I imagine, that puts sort of a strain, especially when you're under a partnership on sort of like, how do we deal with this collectively? Like, it's not just me, it impacts both of us. Could you talk to like what you learned throughout that process and what it was like?
Yeah, you know, I went in and tried to stay. I'm an optimistic person, but tried to stay conservative, right, on everything that I did. So I looked at my numbers on the FDD and said, okay, let's say not even average store numbers. Let's go, 5, 10, 20% less than that. And if our stores can do that, these stores still make sense. Like it's a no-brainer, right?
Mm-hmm.
The challenge was, as someone who is putting these deals together, I have an operator and he's paid like a manager because that's the role that he's filling, but he's being incentivized with equity upside that's vested over time.
Mm,
As they can see that the numbers are dropping, their job's getting harder because they're having to adjust and take
mm,
on more hours and, just deal with the stresses that come with that. Really, it becomes not worth it in a lot of ways, right? Like there's a lot of jobs that pay really well, and somebody's like, man, it's not the opportunity that I thought it was when I got in. And same for the investors, right? So when an investor then starts seeing that and realizing that their time frame goes from getting paid back in 10 months to saying more of a realistic franchise, payback of 5 to 10 years, then it's like, it's not as sexy, right? And so then they're
yeah.
kind of like, hey, I'd love my money back, you know? And at that same time, the other part you run into is, guess what? Interest rates also, again, like we talked about, shot up faster than they've ever done before. So now you're in the crosshairs of a really tough situation for everybody that's involved. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where I think many of these groups got in, where think about the family members that their son or their daughter or mother-in-law or brother went and said, hey, you fund it, I'll go run it. Yeah, it made total sense. But now when that same person is getting paid what they feel is under what they deserve, but there's literally no more money to pay them, it's now a tough spot, right? Because
Yes.
now morally, well, I don't want to leave them in a bad spot, but I also can't stay getting paid this much. And they can't afford to pay you more. What do you do? Right. And that I feel like is the biggest contributor to the decline in profits that we've seen, because that dynamic is just and if you've never dealt with it, it's an impossible task to make the perfect right decisions. Right.
Yeah.
I know I didn't. I know I didn't take all those conversations the right way, but thankfully we're now through that. And I feel like it's a lot more aligned with every party involved.
So what did you end up doing in most of those situations? Is it like replacing with a lower cost manager, or what sort of is the recommended path?
You know,
If there is such a thing.
yeah, I think at the end of the day, what I learned is if I was to redo that again, I think in some aspects it would have just made more sense to not have that operating partner, not because they aren't good at their job, but because for me to keep somebody accountable, better for me to be in those shoes anyways. And then it
Mhm.
does require you to have people to step up more quickly. So I kind of just skipped a step that I tried to bring someone in before to make it so I didn't do that work. And it's kind of like you can't really skip the step. That's ultimately what we've learned. And now we have one person that manages all 9 locations and is working day to day in those, stores. So we're a very lean group, but because of that, everyone can make good money that's involved in the day to day. But it also requires me to step back and be focused on my other businesses.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So I guess you have a crystal ball. 5 years from now, what does Crumbl look like? How's it doing?
I think that you're gonna hear stories like the golden days of Subway, where everyone was like, "Oh man, Subway is dead." Can't believe people still want to own these. And there's some consolidation, but there's going to be some groups that are smart that take advantage, come in and buy some stores at great prices, even if they come in, shut some of them down so that then the other stores would outperform. And you're going to have very strong stores that have now gone into different aspects of the dessert market. It's a staple in the community. It's not going anywhere. And in 5 years, that's really where I see it being at. Let's say that there's 1,000, locations right now in just the US. If it drops, let's say even 100 locations, that's a lot of people would be like, oh, they're failing. But at the same time, the other locations, like I know for a fact, my locations, if one in my area closes, every one of them sees a little uptick,
A
right?
little
And so,
bump. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's not great, but even at the end of my 5-year franchise agreement, we might say, you know what, we've got these paid off. Let's pay off, or let's just close this one down because now we see a decent uptick in our other locations, and now it's more profitable. I'm not going to be mad that I, did that. And who knows? I mean, really, if the macro economy picks up and the disposable income changes at all, I think this is a totally different story. I think
Hmm.
these franchisees that hold on could be in an incredible position. We've all felt it. The cost of living right now is killing everybody. I
For
mean,
sure.
tell me a brand that's not affected right now, truly. And
Yeah.
probably I'll see a 5 to 10% uptick, just life getting cheaper.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I know you founded another business called Initiator Capital or Initiator.co. It's a private debt company. Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about what you guys do and what motivated you to create it?
Yeah, so I've got two awesome partners. They were the ones that originally founded it, and then I came in as a co-founder. And we help people that aren't getting tons of success with banks, especially, get funding. Right now, with the interest rates, the way that they've gone up, it has made a massive opportunity for private debt. That includes the investors. So we've got people that are looking for what they need to do or what they can do with their cash. And this business is that opportunity. So I have businesses on one side that come to me and say, banks aren't looking at my business, the appetite's dropped. But I have investors on this side as well, like, well, I guess I could put it in a CD. But now we're able to combine those and provide a great return for investors and accessible cash for these businesses. So that's the main focus of it.
So is the rate typically like, how does it compare to like an SBA loan typically?
So SBA loans, I just did one this past week. We got our offer and it was 2.75 above prime. So
Yeah.
you're looking at, 11, 12% on where SBA is at on a variable rate. Private debt right now, typically, so my investors, if you wanted to give me money for my debt fund, you're going to get a 12% return. So then I need to be able to make money on top of that, right?
Wow.
So I'm typically giving out debt from anywhere from 15 to 20% and amortized over, a year or two. Um, and it's a great option for the businesses because when you don't have an option, right, and you're trying to grow your business, you're
Right.
realizing that's not bad, right? The days of
Hmm.
us getting, commercial loans at 3 to 5%, it's just not going to be around for a while. And as long as you understand your business well enough to take that money, and again, I'm not going to give money to someone that I don't think is going to pay. Our underwriting team has a loss ratio of less than 2%. So the investors are very happy with the returns that they're getting, and the businesses, they wouldn't take the money unless they knew that they were going to make money with it.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. So what is typically like the criteria that a business would need to meet in order to be considered, for somebody for this?
So I can do, your traditional SBA loans, and that's something where we can start a little bit smaller. But on the private debt side, we typically want to see somebody doing at least 1 million a year or have significant assets to back it. It's just like franchising. If you have franchise experience, if you have locations, you've got more funding options. I've got some traditional, conventional franchising products that are great with experience and locations. But if you're just getting started, all the banks are going to look at your personal balance sheet or your personal financial statement to determine, your credit worthiness.
Makes a lot of sense. Anything else about that company that's important for our listeners to know about?
For this, I would just say as you're getting started in franchising, I own a debt business, but I would highly encourage people if you're just getting into franchising, and especially a new brand, go do it with equity. Let someone else take that risk with you. You don't get rich doing one location in franchising anyways. And if you can diversify your risk on that first one and learn a lot, you then could buy out your partner and maybe it works great. And now you can have a ton more units that you do. But that's my advice is if the more proven the brand is, the more willing I would say I am to give someone debt on it. As same if they're, an operator that has a lot of experience. I tell people it's much better to get, let's say, 50% ownership of a business, but now you're getting cash every month because you don't owe debt, than to own 100%, but all of the money each month is going to pay the debt service.
Yeah,
So it's just
absolutely.
a way to look at it.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate you joining us today. It was super interesting to learn about both these businesses, and definitely looking forward to staying in touch and seeing what happens.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for your time. And again, appreciate all that you're doing for the franchise community.
Appreciate it.